A very good evening to all of you. I have great pleasure in welcoming all of you to this Global Lawyers Colloquium on the theme Diversity in the Legal Profession and Judiciary. What's the hope for the future? My name is Raj Kumar. I'm the Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University and Dean of Jindal Global Law School. I have a very distinguished panel with us, and I look forward to introducing them shortly. We live in a pluralistic society where each citizen occupies diverse identities defined by language, gender, religion, caste, ability, sexuality, culture, and many more identities which are sometimes beyond definition. Many years ago, Nobel laureate Amartya Sen talked about, in a lecture, he said, reason before identity, and later wrote a book on identity and violence. A monolithic and homogenous view of the legal profession and the judiciary would not only do justice to the ideals of pluralism that is embedded in the spirit of the Constitution of India and other countries, but also is reflected in our civic culture. Diversity in the legal profession creates a more holistic reflection of our society, allowing us to serve the cause of justice better, instill faith in our institutions, promote innovation, boost public confidence in the justice delivery mechanisms, and indeed add credibility to the democratic legitimacy that is essential for our governance. The world of law has definitely become more diverse over the years. I dare say some of the achievements that which has happened in the last several decades is reflected also in the contribution of the panelists this evening. While progress has been made, we still have miles to go. How do we get there? Will it take more D&I departments and formal establishments of chief diversity officers in law firms? Will it take more high-level legal and judicial reforms in India, similar to what we have seen in the US, such as the Mansfield Rule? Or will it just require development of awareness, instilling greater sensitivity and promoting enlightened and progressive attitudes for promoting diversity in our society? Is reservation a possible answer? Overcoming the diversity challenge in the legal system is all the more important to bring justice with sensitivity in a post-corona world. We must continue to question pre-existing structures, flawed notions, inherent biases, acquired prejudices, and identify means to create a world that is far more diverse. Let me take this moment to introduce my distinguished panel. Dr. Menaka Guruswamy, as a Rhodes Scholar, a senior advocate in the Supreme Court of India, a renowned academic across prestigious law schools, travels across the world of academia and the legal profession, known for her contributions in landmark cases, including Section 377 and the right to education. She's previously featured in Forbes India's list of women power trailblazer and in Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. Welcome, Menaka. I also have Ms. Pratibha Jain, who's the partner and head of the New Delhi office of Nishit Desai Associates, a graduate of Delhi Law Faculty, Oxford and Harvard Law School, a partner and head of NDA. She leads the funds and regulatory practice of Nishit Desai and has global experience across New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Mumbai. From representing SoftBank in a $1.4 billion investment to working with the Ministry of Finance for structuring India's first sovereign wealth fund, she worked on very challenging projects in financial services and regulatory sector. Welcome, Pratibha. We also have a very distinguished lawyer, my senior from Law Faculty, Delhi University, Mr. Tanveer Ahmed Mir, an advocate and founder partner of Lex Alliance New Delhi. Tanveer is the founding partner of that firm and leads the litigation team in criminal law. He's practicing criminal lawyer and an arguing counsel for nearly 2 decades at various high courts and the Supreme Court. He originally is from the state of Jammu and Kashmir. His experience ranges from narcotics and drugs cases to financial frauds, and he's known to be a very distinguished trial lawyer. Thank you very much, Tanveer, for joining us. We have Ms. Tejal Patil, who's the General Counsel of GE India. Ms. Patil leads a team of legal and compliance professionals and also the co-leader for GE Women's Network Asia Pacific. Prior to this, she was the General Counsel for GE Healthcare Asia Pacific. She is also a qualified solicitor in England and Wales and Bombay Incorporated Law Society. Thank you very much, Tejal, for accepting our invitation. And of course, last but not the least, we have Ms. Pallavi Mehta Wahi. He's the co-US managing partner and firm-wide chair of diversity committee of the distinguished law firm K&L Gates. She's from Seattle. Ms. Wahi is also works on a number of high-stake litigation, has represented Fortune 50 companies, also a recipient of multiple recognitions, such as Puget Sound Business Journal's Power 1000 and Washington Diversity Council's Washington's Top 20 Businesswomen. Thank you, Pallavi, especially for joining us from Seattle, where it is probably 6 a.m. Thank you very much for all the distinguished panelists. We chose to identify the theme of diversity at this moment because this is a continuing challenge. So let me begin by asking Menaka the first question. Menaka, what are your views on the evolution of diversity and inclusion in the world of law? How challenging has it been to break the stereotype of what a successful lawyer should be like, which has been constrained by gender and religion and caste and numerous other challenges that the workplace environment provides? Why don't you start reflecting?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you very much to Raj and Jindal and my distinguished co-panelists. It's so wonderful to be on a panel. I think this is one of perhaps my first panel where the women outnumber the men. This never happens usually in the world of law. So look, I think this is partly a necessary response of values of the Indian Constitution, right? I mean, this is a constitution which is reparative in nature, which is committed to substantive equality. And that constitution, one of the ways you give effect to it is through the courts. And I can talk perhaps better about the courts than any other aspect of the law, right? Because so much of the law is interpreted, the constitution is interpreted, so much of the law is made in the court system. One of the most heartening developments as a lawyer in Delhi is that you look at the Delhi High Court and it's just the extraordinary number of women that you see now at this current moment. You look at the lower courts and it's the extraordinary number of women that you see. Judges in the lower courts, judges in the High Court. And we hope that that kind of change will also come to the Supreme Court. Now, why is this important? Why must you have a legal profession that reflects the country that it speaks for? I mean, the law is giving effect to the aspiration and the values of a country that it speaks to. It can only speak in a more articulate and a better informed way if it is reflective of that country, if it is cross-caste, cross-class, cross-gender. And I think that is why it is also important for the legal profession, especially of a post-colonial country, for the courts to reflect the country outside. Because those experiences that we bring in from our lives is what gives voice to the law. And so if you have only one kind of experience, then you will have only law speaking for one kind of people. And especially in challenging times like these that we live in, the law has great relevance to make amends, to bring the executive to the constitution, to bring people's stories into the courtroom. And there must be lawyers and judges who have an understanding of those stories.
Thank you so much, Menaka, for really kicking off this discussion. Let me move to Pallavi quickly to reflect about the US situation, and more importantly, to reflect about the US corporate law firm situation. I think one of the things that's quite very obvious within the US law firm context is that there is a very strong institutional capacity to respond to these challenges of diversity. In fact, I note that you are a chair of the diversity committee. This is an institutional response to address the problem of diversity. So what has been your experience working as a part of the diversity committee, but also to creating a culture of greater respect for diversity within the firm?
Thanks so much, Raj, for having me on this panel. It's really exciting for me, and it reminds me, being on this panel makes me nostalgic about being back in India. So thanks for doing that. I came to, it's interesting to hear Menaka speak because I came to the US about 20 years ago. And in a lot of ways, I see my experience from going from a majority to being a minority. So it's an interesting perspective from my angle because there is so much nuance in the way that you look at diversity in India. And we are a little bit more stark in the way we look at it. So we follow more the ABA modeling, which is, not a focus on color, gender, LGBTQ, disabled, and veteran status, right? Those are the 5 official statuses. And to me, my experience has always been about going from a place where I was a majority, grew up in Delhi, went to all the schools, when I went to St. Stephen's, went to Cambridge, a very typical experience in some ways. And then when I came here, I was a person of color suddenly. And that person of color has been a big change in the way I viewed myself in the world, right? you go from being the person who looks the same to being the person who very visibly looks different. So I think we in the US are solving for a much more, I feel like a much more visible signs of diversity as well as the invisible signs of diversity. So it's an interesting experience. I think to your question of saying how intentional are you, I think the law firms and our clients are extremely intentional. You know, we are at a stage now where our intentionality is captured in data. It is not captured in intention. So, and I think that is the next evolution of diversity, where the numbers, retention, advancement, promotion speak a story as opposed to good feelings. And I think that's where the US is headed. And, you know, we are proud to be at the forefront of that. You know, we have a big diversity committee. About 34 of us are on it from across the firm, very focused on these issues. But clients, you know, like Tejal is on this panel, we'll hear from her, but many clients like her are the resonant voice behind this. And I think that has been a game shifter for diversity in the US and across the world. You know, the K&L Gates have a number of offices, around 44 offices around the world. We have about 1,800 lawyers across the world. So different kinds of diversity play different roles. But I think particularly to your question about the US, it's really about the intentionality, the data, and our real focus on promotion and retention.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. Let me quickly move to Tejal. Tejal, you know, you, of course, you have a very distinguished career working across different jurisdictions and in the world of a large manufacturing company, a global multinational corporation, as heading an in-house legal team. Do you see some of these practices that are prevalent widely in US law firms and possibly Indian law firms? To what extent that world of in-house counsel responds to it? In some ways, arguably, to what extent let's say the team of lawyers mirror the larger ethos and diversity of the corporation itself? And how do you see that?
So, you know, thank you for having me on the panel, and just taking from what Pallavi has said. Being a US multinational, there was a lot of affirmative action that the company took to promote professional and personal growth of not just women, but, you know, in the US, all other affinity groups. It came to Asia only in about 2000, 2001, where we were encouraged to form small hubs of affinity groups to kind of help each other. In terms of the in-house counsel, I think law itself in India had a stigma. You know, you have the maximum number of lawyer jokes in the world, right? But over time, what's happened is, you know, the legal profession has attained a type of respectability like no other. Now, in-house counsel was at one complete end of the spectrum, because in-house counsels were not considered to be lawyers. They started off considering them to be postmen, you know, people you can have around to figure things out. And that has also changed over the years. So, you know, we're proud to say, for example, in India and GE, 60% of my team is women. And despite being from an infrastructure manufacturing company, the general counsels of my power business, healthcare business, you know, all those that were traditionally considered male domains are headed by women general counsel. A lot of them out, you know, even in other companies now, doing aviation, auto. So it really shows the change that's taking place and trickling down into the in-house world. Women have also traditionally, I think, preferred the in-house world because they presume it has work-life balance. I mean, that's a bit of a fallacy because we work as hard, but in all fairness, working for a multinational, you do control a little bit of your own time. So it has attracted a number of women into the in-house profession. So I would say a direct reflection of what's happening outside, and also a lot of affirmative action by the corporations themselves to attract, promote, and retain women.
Thank you so much, Tejal. Pratibha, I want to quickly move to you, particularly because of the fact that you have had a very rich experience in Indian law firms, and then before that in US law firms, and also in an investment bank. How are things changing? In fact, there is, of course, an argument about numerical diversity of Indian law firms might be probably better than many others. How effective are these policies making change at the ground level? Are law firms much more conscious in India about diversity in relation to leadership? Is that a change that you're seeing today?
So Raj, it's I think I'll answer it slightly differently, because I came to India kind of halfway through my current stint as a lawyer. So I've spent as much time outside India as in India, and I actually found coming to Indian law firm in a senior position probably more easier than I would have in other jurisdictions in the world. Very interestingly, because that to me breaks a lot of myths that we carry in terms of the issues around equality and diversity that we think of in the Indian context versus the rest of the world. And I have a theory towards it. I think the objectification of women and general treatment of women in workplace, I found that in the West, it's a little more in your face than it is in India. Not to take away from the issues that women face in India, but I think if you're coming in at a certain class and a certain seniority, then the distinction between man and a woman kind of diminishes in India. And that shows in the statistics also. It's just pulling out the statistics for this discussion. And there are more, in terms of percentage partnership wise, there are more women as partners in Indian law firms than comparatively at senior positions in the US. And I think we see that actually when we operate, we at least see that in our interactions with other people in other law firms. Having said that, I think there is definitely more awareness among law firms too, compared to when I started here, and I think that's helped by the fact that again we have clients who have policies where they actually are asking us feedback on what our diversity ratio is and what our policies are. And so you're actually forced to, even if we started off in a better position in India, these policies from our in-house counterparts are helping these organizations to even continue this organic growth, which was comparatively more equal than the rest of the world. And I hope that continues.
Thank you so much, Pratibha. Let me move to Tanveer. Tanveer, in some ways, your entry into legal profession and your journey in the legal profession is an interesting example of what is possible in a country like India. But at the same time, it is only fair to say that the kind of challenges that people of different, let's say, minorities in India would face in relation to being part of the legal profession, I'm sure you would have had those experiences. So my question to you is that, how did you overcome those challenges, and where do you see the legal profession shaping in the future, where many more lawyers like you end up being part of the profession and doing successfully as well?
Well, thank you, Raj Kumar, for inviting me to this wonderful panel. And what you said can easily be weighed in gold. So if I, throw myself back around, I'm now 49. So I came from Kashmir to New Delhi to study at DU when I was just about 21. So that's somewhere in 1991, 92. And with the outbreak of, militancy in Kashmir, in my first year, I would have been chucked out of at least about 6 places on account of my ethnicity and religion. And that's only as a student. But yes, there's one thing. One is an element of personal grit and determination. And ones that, you also get to explore and meet a lot of people. And, I would humbly say that my journey of about staying in New Delhi, coming from Kashmir for last about 28, 29 years, is that I have met some very, very ordinary people, but I have met some extraordinary people as well. So I believe, some amount of challenges, in regard of where you come from and what is your class, what are your spiritual beliefs, what kind of a sex you belong to, or whether you're fairer sex man coming from, has its own set of challenges, perhaps all over the world. But I would say a very, very strong, a passionate belief in your own abilities. And also, ultimately, Raj, I have been a 2-decade criminal trial lawyer. And, I have proven my mettle, if little, what I have done. Say, for example, being a lawyer, standing shoulder to shoulder with, say, Mr. Ram Jethmalani in 2G Spectrum case, without, anybody, basically trumping you up or even recommending you, maybe only on the basis of your past performance. Even Arushi Talwar, Hemraj double murders, or, I have been defending other clients. But yes, the journey has been, one of great challenge. And I must say I've relished this challenge. And I feel, very nice when I look about, past 20 years of what I went through. But what, I have learned myself is that, it's very important for us when we get into, for example, I started a law firm with my partners. We have around 25 lawyers working with us, and all are hardcore trial lawyers. So let me give you an example. So I have had about more than 12 girls in the office who we have trained for about 4 years, 3 years. Some of them are now individual practicing lawyers. Some have walked into corporates. So there is a girl about 6 years of experience in my office, and I've given her all the freedom, unfettered. So she goes to Tis Hazari District Court, daily, and does about 6 cases daily, of which at least 3 would be evidence, would be arguments. So one is the recognition that people of diverse backgrounds are very necessary, because we are born equal. We are all free. We are to be treated equally, and we should have equal opportunities of pursuing our dreams.
Thank you.
Now, how the situations can gel up, how the system can work, I guess, we have to first start with our own selves, that when we are providing work opportunities to incoming lawyers in the offices, are we purposely, also looking for people with diverse backgrounds? For example, if somebody comes to me, say, from a background of Nagaland, now, am I supposed to refuse the girl because she's from Northeast, I would like somebody only coming from a national law school, and not, wanting to recruit a person who would have studied law perhaps in Assam? I feel that in the way I work, there's a lot of hand-holding in the court itself.
Tanvi, thank you so much for that. I think you really touched upon several interesting and important issues of diversity that we face on a day-to-day basis. Menaka, let me now move into a more specific issue related to diversity. I think the panel, the introductory remarks of all of you has given us a lot of food for thought. So let's talk about the big challenge of diversity, let's say in the judiciary. Today in India, we have less than 11% of women judges in the Supreme Court and High Courts as a percentage of working strength. To a large extent, it is not an unfair comment to say that the judiciary remains an old boys club. While statistics alone does not fully reflect the larger challenge of diversity, is it time for us to reimagine the framework of judicial appointments that will provide a greater space for these voices to come to the forefront?
Yeah, I think that this is a very good question, Raj, because obviously, we are all in the legal profession concerned about the lack of sufficient number of women judges, right? Now, that's not to say that this is just a, this is just a statistic that needs to be addressed. But it reflects something deeper, right? We need to understand why a certain institution, for lack of better language, isn't able to attract more women, right? Let us assume that's the case, because we heard Tejal, we heard Pratibha talking about women partners at law firms, right? Which is apparently now you're in majority. So there is clearly facets of the legal profession that women are either not pursuing or are not being selected to. And some of it is we need to understand the obstacles, the structural obstacles within litigation, right? One of the other statistics, which is very interesting, Raj, is that I think there are a few hundred senior advocates in the Supreme Court since the Supreme Court was created from the federal court. In the history of the Supreme Court, I believe that there are 12 women senior advocates. This is, in contrast with the many hundreds of men. Women lawyers are extremely competent, extremely capable. So, there are obviously structural issues in the profession as you start, right? Because, it's a profession. You end up as a judge if you've practiced for at least 20 to 25 years, unless you're a career judge, right? So you've taken the exam and you've come in. And that is a big change we're seeing. A lot of women are taking those judicial services exams. So at the lower courts, you're seeing a lot of women. Hopefully, then you'll see the reflection where they'll ascend, right, to the High Court and then to the Supreme Court. But I think part of it is this, that what are the structural impediments? I grew up in a chamber of Mr. Ashok Desai. Mr. Desai passed away about a month and a half ago. I went to work for him as an intern, when I was 19 years old. With great difficulty, I mustered up the courage to ask him for a job when I graduated from law school. And then I worked for him, and that was my first and only job as a lawyer in the legal profession. I stayed in his chambers, and then I practiced law. What was important is what is the environment you create in the chamber, right? Because if this is the long journey, right, to a judgeship is a long journey of 20 to 30 years minimum of practice, what is the environment in that chamber? In Ashok Desai's chamber, we were all equal. We all fought about the law, about interpretation of the law. We all worked long hours. It was a space where every junior was valued equally, right? So what is the kind of offices that we are creating, right? Are women and men treated equally? Are lower and upper caste treated equally? I think are different religions treated equally? So much of what this profession in the court system looks like also reflects the structural impediments, at the ground. And, my co-panelist spoke about, I think it's wonderful that, that he will recruit widely across and he looks to capability and merit. That is something that we have to absorb as a profession.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Menaka, for that. Pallavi, one of the threshold challenges that we face in the diversity discussions in India is in relation to the very concept of merit. And this aspect of merit is brought to the forefront in numerous discourses, particularly in the context of judicial appointments, but also in other contexts. So when I look at US, how does a firm, let's say, value the importance of leadership positions being available for people coming from different diversities, and how that conversation is able to successfully overcome the merit argument? And as if somehow whenever you talk about diversity, you need to overcome the threshold challenge of merit. How does that take place, let's say, in firms like yours in the US?
That's a great question. I think one of the challenges that I think we all face is when people talk about qualified minorities, right? I mean, I think in a lot of ways that's a big insult, because there are no qualified minorities, they're qualified lawyers, right? And I think at the end of the day, there is a threshold issue that exists across the US, which is very merit-based. I just think back to myself. I came to this country 20 years ago. And at my firm, I was given this position of being the head of the Seattle office when I was on my maternity leave. So I got a call to take over the Seattle office when I was on my maternity leave. I took over the US as a co-US managing partner about 1.5 years ago. And, I'm 43 years old and I'm a first generation immigrant. And, in this room, I don't have an accent. In the room that I live in, usually I do have an accent, So I think you do have to look, you do have to take a step back and say that I don't think it's so much about the conversation, but it is more about the outcome. And what you're seeing across the US is a number of people who look like me, who are, women, people of color in different kinds of leadership roles. And I think kind of goes back a little bit to the discussion we're having about numbers versus impact. And I think you can move toward a system where you have more people. But the question is, do those people hold power? And I think that's the same conversation really about merit. If you are recruiting people based on merit, I think in some ways that's just a given over here. We are going to recruit the best people for the job. We're going to make sure we recruit in all the places possible. And we're going to make sure we get the people who really want to own the job and be successful at it. I think Tanveer was mentioning equal access to opportunity. I think Menika has mentioned similar themes. We institutionalize that a little bit. We use workflow systems. We use database systems that help people get equal access to opportunity without bias, right? And I think that's really one of the things that you work towards. But I think to have that, you have to recognize that to be able to get to a place where merit plays a role, and I think in some ways we may be in that place already in the US, we really do have to focus on those roles becoming powerful roles. And I think that has been a big impact issue for us to really push people into leadership, really push people into roles where they can then cause more impact.
Thank you very much, Pallavi. For all the viewers, please send in your questions. We are live on YouTube and feel free to send in your questions. In the next 20 minutes, we'll move to our Q&A session as well. Let me take this to Tejal. Tejal, one of the big challenges that we are indeed facing is that what ought to be, let's say, the public policy objective within a firm or an organization to recognize the importance of diversity. As it is extremely challenging for women to work hard to actually compete in a male-dominated society. And then to acquire leadership positions is even more difficult. And you are the general counsel of GE. So then the question is, what kind of organizational transformation, including mindset changes that people should have with a view to creating a diverse workspace where women and their contributions is equally valued?
So it's a very valid point, because here the tone needs to start from the top. It's not a bottoms-up approach where, you want women to struggle their way up. It has to be a top-down organization, value, approach, and goal. So for example, we used to have, call ourselves D&I, diversity and inclusion. We recently changed it to I&D, because really what diversity is a place at the table. But what inclusion is a voice at the table. So it wasn't really enough to just bring people to the table, right? You have to give them a voice. Starting off with recruitment, we're a complete meritocracy. Most organizations are, and they should be. What the managers would tell the HR is that for every recruitment slate, there should be a diverse candidate. I do not guarantee hiring the person. I will hire the best person for the role, but bring me a diverse slate. I think it starts from there. Then it goes on really to how lawyers are perceived in the organization. And law firm, of course, it's all lawyers. But even if you look at an in-house organization, we were always treated as part of the entire organization, not a support appendage. So the training, we were given management training, we were given financial training. In fact, I was sent with a number of my colleagues to a Harvard course on customer centricity. And I was the only lawyer in the group. And, most people said, why are you there? And I said, why? Because I have customers and I need to be customer centric. So you need male champions, female champions, you need a senior leadership involvement to drive these, policies, procedures across. And then you have what I call the, on the spot coaching. So I went into a meeting with one of the large government companies in the country, and we were negotiating. And by default, the other person kept looking at my male colleague on the side for answers. When, he had to actually turn around and say, but I think you'll need to talk to her because she's the decision maker in the room. Now, sometimes it's important to put it out there on the spot. So along with sort of the broader policies, I think you also need to, on a daily basis, watch out for these unconscious biases that creep in and deal with them.
Well, thank you so much for that. I was about to raise that question, but anyways, I'm glad you brought it. Pratibha, so this point about unconscious bias is something which all of us battle. Let me take that question to the next level, which is, to what extent, issues surrounding diverse sexual orientation, people who have that may not, let's say, feel comfortable to disclose that. However, their unique perspectives are critical, and to create an office environment where such diversity is reflected need to be part of, let's say, a firm's goal or objective. Clearly, the decriminalization of Section 377 did something to that journey, but we still have a long way to go. So what steps can be taken in workplace environment to promote that space and acceptance of different forms of diversity, both visible and even invisible?
Sure. Before I go to your question, Raj, can I just chime in on the Indian Supreme Court?
Sure.
I honestly believe there's absolutely no excuse for the abysmal diversity that is there on the Indian Supreme Court. In today's day and age, where it's a recognized issue that pretty much every aspect of the society is working towards, to have a Supreme Court which is not discussing it openly, which doesn't talk about a policy even towards achieving it, and then just looking at it from where we are today. To the extent, yes, we are doing better in terms of attracting more women towards litigation, and Medika is a beacon. I have a few other friends from my batch in law school, who are there in litigation. But why wait for even, our batch of people to get there? To the extent that we have chief justices or justices in high court that are eligible, there is absolutely no excuse in my mind for not elevating them to the Supreme Court. We're not even talking about reaching, 1/3, which is like an accepted norm for the rest of the world, for all industries, for all different professions, right? We are nowhere even near that number. So I really hope, there is a more active discussion on this in the country. Yes, it's a very opaque system of deciding, and I leave that to the constitutional lawyers in terms of, what method we have in terms of, and the opaqueness of how you're appointing the judges. But at least objectively, the number needs to increase, whatever method they get to. Sorry, I just had to put that out there.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
In terms of the LGBT community, I can't even begin to imagine. It's just so new that, this has been decriminalized in India. And I can only imagine the kind of issues, like, as a woman, having worked in different parts of the world, having, faced what we have to get here. Now, add to that the fact that, you're from that community, and it was criminalized till recently in our country. So for them, I think Section 377 being repealed really helped, but active measures will be required to bring them to any levels near where they can feel normal in these organizations. And active, again, you need policies, right? There are unique issues with respect to the community, other than, the diversity issues that we've been talking about. So they would, you need a specific policy recognizing the benefits that are available, because I think that becomes a bottleneck for this community. So you need to be sure that your your benefit policies covers the unique issues related to this community. You also need to very actively look at the spaces to make them comfortable. So, whether it's the public spaces, whether it's the toilets, anything that you need to get into an inclusive discussion and talk about how to make this community feel more comfortable. And lastly, you need mentors. I think mentors is something that, for ensuring what Tejal was talking about, the inclusiveness, right? You need not just a place on the table, but you need the senior members providing and supervising, and the HR supervising the growth of these people in the organization.
Thank you so much, Pratibha, for that. There is no question about the fact that the situation with regard to judicial appointments need to go through a dramatic transformation. And I have elsewhere argued that we need to revisit even the collegium system, because the existing collegium system will make it extremely difficult for senior women members of the judiciary to even participate as a member of the collegium, let alone have a voice in some form through others, playing for it. And of course, thank you for your comments on the LGBT aspect as well. Tanveer,
yes.
So, listen, a lot of this, what we're discussing today, its foundations may be even family and other social institutions, even educational systems, school, college, university, right? Because at the end of the day, if we are expecting lawyers who are expected to be guardians of the rule of law, who are supposed to uphold the constitution and the rules and the regulations, if they are somehow directly, indirectly, willy-nilly participating in contributing to this, lack of tolerance and appreciating diversity, there is something fundamentally problematic that we're facing. So my question to you is, how do we change it? How do we make this legal profession more respectful and appreciation of all forms of diversity? And can it just begin when people are already in, or we'll have to go way early to deal with this problem?
Well, Dr. Rajkumar, this is a humongous question, but out of my personal experience, Dr. Rajkumar, I think you will have to have a policy which has, two stages of attack, if I will permit me to use the word. One is that you will have to address this problem right from the day when the lawyers walk into a university to study law and go into a 5-year institution. So there is something called as, inspiration right at the university level. Now, with respect to my other co-panelists, but Dr. Rajkumar, Pratibha, and I, we come from CLCDU. So we have been inspired by some legendary people who taught us there. So certain values of how you have to pursue your legal profession and your personal life, we ingrained from the people who mentor us. So mentorship is something which is very important. But the day you go into an institution, for example, some of my co-panelists are into a very dedicated stream of corporate practice. Madam Manika is a Supreme Court senior. I am a trial lawyer. So second is court-based. So let me give you an example. When I went in 2012 to Ghaziabad District Court, which is only about 45 minutes in Delhi, to do the trial for my clients in Arushi Talwar Hemraj double murders, over next 1 year, I was there at least about 3 days every week. I don't think in Ghaziabad District Court, I saw more than 5 women. Now, I spent 4 months arguing an appeal in Allahabad. So again, I would not have seen more than say 2 dozen women. But The situation definitely in Delhi and Bombay, perhaps in Calcutta and Bangalore, Hyderabad, may be different. So mentorship in the offices, in the chambers is very important. How we treat the incoming lawyer, how we encourage, and how we also choose a person and develop, allow him to develop his own qualities, give him freedom to work, freedom to sort of express yourself, take cases independently. And also, since I am, in a different kind of practice, the greatest dilemma for a lawyer is, say, sir, that if I worked with a senior, say about for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, and now I want to go independent, who supports me? So that's a very, huge dilemma. Here also, over the years, what has happened is people who are established, they wouldn't now, want to be sharing a lot of fee with other lawyers. So I have a system where, wherever I am doing an outstation brief and say there are about 10 lawyers who have passed out of my office. So I'll ask 2 of them to join with me. And I'll make it sure that if I get an X amount of fee, say per a hearing to go down to Bombay, they'll also get a bit of fee. And that will, invigorate their interests qualitatively, quantitatively, they'll build. So when they have their own offices, I firmly believe that they'll adopt the same policies. Right? That's very important. So Dr. Saab, right from the university, also, at the court itself, it just allow me 10 seconds. How, because I have not been, since the ladies have spoken about, now the ladies' position in corporate law firms is different in comparison to the core lawyering, where a lawyer is delivering justice for a client. Now, in criminal defense practice, till now, even in places like Delhi, in serious crime, the clients are very apprehensive to trust their destinies in the hands of women. So those ceilings have to be broken. That's why I do, as a matter of practice in my firm. So if one of my lawyers goes to a district court daily, I make it sure, and I'm always on the clients, that this is the person who will fight your case. You have to trust my instinct, my decision, that she will do very good. So initial couple of hearings, the clients are apprehensive. Then they, start gathering confidence that, right, Mr. Mir, perhaps you're not needed. Your younger colleague is doing absolutely fine. That's how we can achieve these objectives. Diverse. And allow me, Dr. Saab, just one second. I am reminded of a very, very, notoriously infamous case coming out of J&K, which hogged the Heimler. This was this famous 10-year-old rape of a girl, now infamously called as Kathua rape case. It saw 2 women, coming valiantly out. So there was this lawyer suddenly, coming out of Jammu. In the Jammu bar, all the bar passed a resolution that, none of the lawyers, will take the complainant's case. That is the father of the girl. And they all said that accused are innocent and they're being prosecuted falsely. So there was this girl called Deepika Rajawat. She stood up and she went up to Supreme Court. I was, thunderblown when I saw a famous Hollywood actress, Emma Watson, commend her on Twitter. And another lady which I saw doing a more than a commendable job was Honorable Acting Justice, Geeta Mittal of Honorable Delhi High Court. When the picture of the girl was shown on various media, so moto, her ladyship summoned all the newspapers, TV channels, and took them to cleaners. So sometimes the ladies in the profession can bring much more on the table in comparison to men. That we have to assimilate and understand.
Thank you, Tanveer. And that's a fantastic set of responses and reflections. And I appreciate your leadership in this. Menika, so, well, when you hear Tanveer, like the stories that he says, it seems a lot of which is dependent upon individual leadership and even at times, the deeper sense of sensitivity of individual lawyers who are out there. But we know that legal profession is a large institutional context. We know there are, in the Indian context, there is not any clear data, but we are looking at nearly 2 million lawyers. We're graduating 75,000 lawyers every year. We have 1,600 plus law schools. It's a large legal profession. So how do we, A, address the institutional aspects of discrimination and exclusion? But more importantly, when do we know that we are actually going to be successful? What is the measure of success?
Yeah, no, I think these are very good questions. I think first, I want to sort of just take a minute to kind of build on what Tanveer is saying, because before the world changed, Raj, and we were locked down. I was probably 2 weeks before that, I was in the Chhattisgarh High Court, which is in Bilaspur, arguing a forgery case, defending this allegation of forgery. Of course, my client was innocent. And after that, from there, I went to Aurangabad, where the Bombay High Court has a division, bench, and it's 15 judges, and it's a big presence of the Bombay High Court there. What is interesting is even in the Chhattisgarh High Court, right, in Bilaspur, the number of young women who want to be lawyers, who are becoming lawyers, law students, interning, young female lawyers at the bar. I was arguing a criminal case, so before the criminal panel of judges, they were there waiting for their own matters. The president of the Aurangabad lawyers bar is a woman, is a young woman, and these are big courts, right? Our imagination of the law is Delhi and Bombay, but these are big courts, 20 judges, 15 courtrooms, And so there is a change that is happening, and not all of it is driven by Delhi and Bombay. There is this remarkable phenomenon of young women going to law school. I think the statistics are very interesting, because in many leading law schools and in many not so known law schools, women are either on par in terms of enrollment as men, or outstripping them, right? So there is this phenomenon of young women wanting to become lawyers. I mean, that is the first part of it. And part of, I love traveling to other high courts in this country, because you see your country changing more so than in Delhi and Bombay, right? So that's the first thing. I want to sort of put it out there, because I know Tanveer didn't see too many women in Ghaziabad, but it's interesting. I think it varies from court to court. That change is happening, and it makes me very optimistic. Now, I think the second thing is, to your question, how do you evaluate? What do you do and how do you evaluate? I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, said a long time ago, how many women is enough on the Supreme Court of America, right? The 9 judges. And she said, well, 9 judges who happen to be women would be enough. Now we have, a Supreme Court of 30 odd justices, 34. We're at 3 women judges. I am optimistic. How do you survive in a court system where there are very few women counsel, where very few women senior advocates? I mean, on all markers, I was not the norm, right? On any marker you can think of, I am not the norm. I think you survive for 2 reasons. And Tanveer already hit one: grit, right? No question. But also, the law is fun. It's interesting. And you have to be fundamentally optimistic about your place in this fun profession, and that it will change, and you will push that change. I think the big thing and the big part of this is litigation certainly reflects the country that we live in. And the country that we live in has foundations in patriarchy. There's no question. Right? In my experience, it is not so much that clients want male lawyers. In my experience, it's the people who control work in the legal profession. If there are so many women partners at corporate law firms, then surely you think that some women are worthy of sending work to. So the point is that, some part of this is this is not about men versus women at all. This is about questioning power structures. Those power structures could be gender, could be caste, could be orientation, what have you. When will we know that we're successful? We will know that we are successful when I say this all the time. We will know that we're successful when the court system, the bench that Pratibha spoke about, the bar that I'm a part of really reflects the demographics of this country. And so the solution to that is not, are we going to have, quotas? Are we going to? It is about a profession understanding that for real legitimacy, you have to look like this country.
Thank you so much, Menaka, for that. Send in the questions for all those viewers. We will be very shortly moving into our Q&A session. Pallavi, I was fascinated to see and read about the Mansfield rule in the United States. It was quite extraordinary that law firms, even a large number of them would come together somewhat voluntarily, accepting to be part of a club, recognizing that they will, have 30% of their leadership positions, out of, women and other diverse groups. Most recently, the 4.0 version of the Mansfield rule even has brought in disability and many other versions. So, it'll be a fantastic, useful for our own country in India to see what this Mansfield rule is about. And in real terms, is it working? Is the Mansfield rule working?
Perhaps before I even go there, I wanted to address one issue which I think Pratibha raised about policies. And I think Mansfield rule is also very similar to that concept of what are the policies that you're using? What are the things that are making a tangible difference, and how are you putting them down in writing? So I think the Mansfield rule is one example of that kind of policy. And as you know, the Mansfield rule is something that was piloted by an organization called the Diversity Lab. It's a great organization. It's run by a fantastic woman. I'm sure she would love to be on this panel. She's a pretty incredible woman, someone who many of us know really well. And it came out of collaboration. She brought together a number of people to think about ways in which we can diversify the legal profession. So the Mansfield rule is a voluntary, based, it really forces law firms to think about who's on the table. It's not really about creating any kind of quotas or any kind of ways in which people are looked at, other than making sure that the pool of people that you look at are diverse for all appointments. And I think that's really fundamentally what it's about. And I think fundamentally it goes back to what Menaka is talking about and what others on the panel have touched on is who's on the table being considered, who's being given the work, how are they giving the work, how is it that they are being looked at, and is the pool the right pool, right? And I think one of the things we have to be really thoughtful of, and something that I struggle with, is not really sitting there and saying we must give the woman the work or we must give the person of color the work, because I think that's, in all fairness, that's patronizing, right? I should not be getting work because I'm a woman or because I'm a person of color. I should be getting work because I'm part of a pool in which I am the right person for the job. And I think that's really where we have to go towards, right? And I think that's maybe a little bit of where we are headed and where we need to be, because I think there is a real danger that if we go to a place where I am getting work because I'm a woman, tomorrow I'll be questioned for a result because I'm a woman. I should be questioned for a result because I'm a professional, and I should be making the same professional mistakes that you and I will make. And it should not be because you're a man and I'm a woman, or, in this instance, in the US, because I'm a person of color, or how it may be. I think that's one part of what Mansfield rule really encourages, that inclusive characteristics of looking at pools broadly. I think the other part of it is really the policy part that Pratibha had brought up, right? What are the policies you can put in place to make that happen? In the US, big issues about mothers. I think some people have touched on that a little bit. I want to make sure I bring that to the fore. Unlike in India, we do not have, we don't have Menaka and Tanveer and Pratibha, right? We have one firm which litigates, and also I'm a trial lawyer, but I work in a corporate firm. So I'm not a corporate lawyer, I'm a trial lawyer, right? But the fact is I'm also a mother. So how do I balance that and make sure that the people coming behind me are balanced? So we have a lot of policies. We have a policy called ramp up, ramp down. In the US, we're very focused on the billable hours. So what we have is a policy that allows people to ramp down before they leave for their pregnancy leave and then ramp up again. So it really takes into account their own real limitations of what being a mother can be. The other thing we pushed hard on is not making it just limited to mothers, really talk about parents, because that's the real important situation, that women will succeed if they are part of a parenting unit, not that they are the ones carrying all the responsibility for being parents. So we've really focused on that as a policy. The other thing we really focus on is balanced hours. But again, going back to the point I'm trying to make is we should be given chances, or we should not be given extra credit for being women. We just want an even playing field. And I think that's really what it all comes down to, is even the playing field for us in a way that we are not sitting there acknowledging the woman in Aurangabad is the leader of the bar association, right? That's just the best person for the job.
Yeah.
Could be anybody who looks like her, right? And I think that for me is the critical takeaway, is let's focus more on equalizing the pool, equalizing the opportunity, less about giving someone something. And I don't want to get anything from anybody. I'm more than capable of going and getting.
Thank you so much, Pallavi, for that. I'm going to challenge Pallavi's fundamental premise and ask Tejal a question. Tejal, in the context of affirmative action and quotas debate in India, particularly in relation to reservation policies, there's a very strong argument that's been made that if you treat unequal people equally, you are actually perpetuating inequality. So in some ways, it's both legally and constitutionally accepted that if people are fundamentally unequal, you need to actually give special privileges to some people to actually ensure that you're not perpetuating inequality. Now, I want to bring this to you simply because in the world of workplace, clearly the context of women's contribution and sharing of their roles as both as a mother and as a parent and all of that, there is a natural difference what men do and what women do. So the question is, treating equally may not just be enough. We need to create new sorts of mechanisms which will value the women's contributions beyond the workplace, and somebody need to foot the bill. It could be the state, it could be the private sector, but somebody has to foot the bill.
So I think, Raj, what you've done is you've hit the nail on the head. Okay? Everyone is not the same. And the fundamental thing that I'm going to say is I don't believe in equality. I believe in equity. Equity is a fair and impartial system that allows everybody to grow and thrive. When you strive for equality amongst people who have different needs, you're driving a very different debate at a different outcome. What you need is an environment that enables people with different needs to grow. Now, there is a fact that when we talk about, women judges, we talk about women seniors, we talk about litigation, the fact is, why is it that law schools have 50% women students and then it trickles down to less single digits as it goes on? Because the fact is that women have choke points in their career. And it has to be accepted that these choke points exist, okay? So let's not just even look at, say, children, right? You'll have one point where the woman's having children, and then you've got to say, okay, I've got a maternity benefit act, but you're not always creating a positive view by that. So for example, I would look at it as fine, 6 months leave for the first child, 6 months leave for the second, 6 months for third, fourth. No, if you want to have 3, 4, 5 children, hey, do it at your own time, because the fact is there is an organization to run. There is, work to be had. Then you go on to the second choke point, which is, for example, aging parents. You have a lot of women who in their 40s and 50s have aging parents or aging in-laws, and they become a primary caregiver at that point. So when we look at quotas or reservations, that's really taking away from meritocracy, but helping and giving women a little bit of a boost in these sections of their lives, I think enables them really to look beyond, the immediate obstacles into the future. The way I see this, one of the surveys that was actually conducted that said a lot of, the women lawyers actually said, hey, I would love a wife who would look after me. I mean, who wouldn't want it, right? So the idea really is not about, creating the quota all the way up. It's helping them along through these journeys and enabling them to come back into the work environment. And then to Pallavi's point, and Manaka's, there's nothing is going to stop the women from rising all the way to the top if you help them through this. Is the way I see it.
Thank you so much, Tejal. Pratibha, I want to take that aspect of this both, I think Pallavi and others have spoken about the work-life balance, so to say. I remember you do talk about this idea that if you're a woman, there is nothing like a work-life balance, because you are constantly, the demands on your time is so profound, both in terms of family life as well as work life. And if any one of those things get compromised, not because somebody goes after you, there are a lot of women who end up feeling guilty on both sides. How can women deal with it? How can they respond to this?
So I think that lockdown and technology usage that has increased, especially in law firms, post the lockdown, I think is going to be a big boon for men understanding what we mean when we talk about work-life balance, I think. So, these videos of children screaming in when men have been on video conferences is just so refreshing and so familiar. I think that's definitely something I'm hoping is going to help level the playing field a lot more. But I think it's the norm of what you just said, which is what worries me, right? The work-life balance, the maternity issues, it's just one part of the story. That is not. And just addressing those is, to me, not going to address the main issue. Because what I've seen over the years, it's not just when you go for a maternity leave or when you're getting married that women face issues in workplace. It's the unconscious bias. It's the fact that you're not a majority. It's the fact of how you work is very different from how a man works. How you lead, your leadership qualities are very different from what traditional definition of leadership is. So unless we break those mindset barriers, and unless we start recognizing that there are different models of leadership and there are different ways of working. So for example, my negotiation techniques might not be in your face, I'm going to put the other person down and just bully my way through a particular meeting. I can do it quietly, smilingly, and not moving from my position. So I think I have seen, like, for example, when I started the Delhi office for my firm, we were 90% women. And then the women started complaining there weren't enough men around. So we started getting more men. And then before I knew, we were 30% women. And that's where you really, and over the years as a leader, I have realized the unconscious bias is even in my mind, because I'm used to a certain style of dealing with people. And unless you have the policies that Pallavi is talking about, unless you recognize the fact that you've got to keep looking at the numbers and not just be comfortable, today I am very equally situated in terms of my diversity ratio. And I'm not just saying men, women, I think we should consider all diversities. It's good for business. Unless we put a structure in place, it's not going to help. Now, I have for 1 year when I was at Goldman, I was working from home in Delhi while the office was in Mumbai. And for all my years at NDA, I've had office in the same building as my home. So for me, work-life balance is life. There is no point where I am not working in the day or in the night. I am 24/7. Which is true for the men in the profession too, and for other women who don't have kids or are not working from home, true too. But in my case, it's just, I think it's just understanding that just working from home doesn't mean that work-life balance needs to be, more defined by my organization. It was up to me. So whenever anybody asks me, how do you manage it? I say, day to day, because it's my career and I need to figure out how best to navigate it. what I need from my organization, and this is what I try to do for my juniors, is recognize not just for a woman who has kids, but recognize for everybody that there might be different styles of working, different styles of leadership, and encourage that. And that's why you need mentors and policies.
Thank you so much, Pratibha. Listen, we have got over 125 questions already, and very shortly we will go into that. And I request the viewers to send in their questions. Tanveer,
Yes.
So Tanveer, one of the things that I think there's lots of, all of you are talking about culture in a way. How do you define organizational culture? Traditional firms like yours, where in the sense you do mostly civil and criminal and litigation type work, you end up, recruiting,
Yes.
people who come from the legal profession, but also you end up having different types of clients as well. So my question is, what is your strategy to promote diversity? How do you actually, let's say, I believe you are doing some things, but let's say after we leave today, what is it you're going to do in the next few weeks, months, to think in terms of promoting a conscious sense of diversity within your firm, including the mindset of your lawyers and partners and even your founders?
Correct. Well, Dr. Saab, first of all, when you talk about diversity, first of all, you have to appreciate that diversity is a boon, it's not a bane. Diversity has to be respected. I find personally, whenever I'm, on the drive, sometimes I'm going to Gurgaon District Court, subconsciously, I always, go to President Barack Obama's speech in South Africa on the birth anniversary of Nelson Mandela, when he said, that diversity is such a huge thing for any culture, any country, and it's so important. It enables you to draw resources from various corners, and those resources then can contribute to achieving a common goal. Common goal is respect for all, success. And if anybody has a doubt on this proposition, please go and ask the French football team, which just won the World Cup, because not all of them looked like goals to me. This is a very huge statement from the former president. So first of all, I must have love and respect for diversity as a citizen. Now, there are people, who talk about diversity on various platforms. And when it then comes to them, they have very different perceptions. Sometimes they even would go down and put a block. The governments and dispensations of the time also have a great duty. For example, in a multi-diverse country as ours, where, food and clothing would change every 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers, the dispensations also have to take the diversity as an essential element of Indianness, of the Indian success. Can you have success in United States, if you shun diversity? So therefore, first you have to regard diversity as a boon, and then inherently you can work on it. And Raj, I have something on affirmative action. You see, if you look like top 10 corporate law firms, individual lawyers, small law firms, boutique law firms, a trial court lawyer like me, handling a first court litigation, wanting to deliver justice for the clients is a different thing. But if you look at top 10 Indian corporate law firms, how many lawyers do they recruit, say coming from Aligarh Muslim University, Banaras Hindu University, out of smaller states, out of Northeast? And are the recruitment policies really very diverse? Do you need to attend on, give some thought to that? Will you say that, we will recruit only people who come from, perhaps more gifted national law school streams? Will we say that if we give a chance to somebody, say, coming from a minuscule law school, who would not have, normally the opportunities which a student who goes to good 5-year institutions has, and if you give him a bit of a holding of hand, do you think that in next 3 or 4 years he's incapable to perform? So to that extent, Dr. Saab, I think we have to think more, we have to do more, and that can inherently only be possible when we, solemnly affirm onto ourselves that our diversity is something to be, to cherish about, to value, and to live it through. And then we can do wonderful things in our small offices, and we can have great success stories. I'm sure that a lawyer like Manika, I say this with all the respect, she's a designated, senior advocate, having profound practice. Most of the practice is in Supreme Court. But I would also love to see women who go to trial courts and spend about 15 years of core criminal defense and civil practice also be designated as seniors. So that would be, a measure of success to me would be when it comes from there as well.
Thank you, Tanveer. Thank you so much. So listen, it's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm grateful to all of you for this. Let's go to the questions that are coming up. But before I do that, Tanveer, I really appreciate you taking the diversity discourse to a much broader framework, which is also part of the objective of this. A couple of years ago, Jindal Global Law School and also other schools in our university produced a report. The university produced a report on diversity, and we identified 16 indicators of diversity, institutional diversity. And I want to quickly list down because we dwelt on that. National origin, state origin, gender, age, religion and caste, educational and professional background, disability, academic offerings and interdisciplinarity, pedagogy, research and disciplinary diversity, international partnerships and collaboration, governance and leadership, student financial inclusion, inclusive teaching and learning, gender identity and sexual orientation, and community outreach and engagement. We produced a 200-page report on that. But in that process, what we learned is there are several aspects of diversity. We have a long way to go. And diversifying the diversity discussion was also very critical. All right, let me now quickly go to questions. As I said, now we have reached over 130 questions, and obviously we won't have time to take all of them. There's a question from Suruchi Kumar, and I'll go to Menaka. Suruchi is asking, how do we ensure that women staying in the profession are not discriminated on account of maternity-related grounds and do not have to work extra so that they are simply able to maintain the position of a man? And in that process, HR departments don't see women to be some sort of a liability.
No, I mean, I think that, it's a very good question. And I think that, my fellow panelists have spoken to this. I mean, I think Tejal spoke about the two choking points for women. And one of them is obviously, when they're pregnant and they choose to have children. I think the reality is in the setting of a firm or in the setting of a company, whether it's GE, whether it's Nishit Desai Associates, you can actually have policies, right, where you give maternity benefit and so on and so forth. But in the setting of a private practitioner, this is complex, right? Because you are not part of a large, you're not an employee of an organization. You are likely, the solo practitioner yourself. And in order to attract clientele or, senior, in order to attract solicitors, you have to keep working. In the court system, it's very interesting as you go through the court system. So if I go to a CVI court, I'm likely to see women across the age group. But at the Supreme Court, we have seen that there is a certain loss between the ages of 30 to 40 or 45. And then, so there are women on this end, and there are, of course, prominent women on that end. This is the middle band that we don't see, right? And some of these women who we don't see for a while will then come back. But you have lost those years. As a solo practitioner, it is extremely difficult, right? And, in something that Pratibha says, has great resonance, which is that, she's always working, right? Whether it's in that building, which is also has the home, or whether it's in that building, which also has the office space. So that is the great challenge, really. The great challenge is for the self-employed solo practitioner. What do we do? What are the safeguards? What is the protective net? a long time ago, the Supreme Court started a creche in the Supreme Court. It's received mixed reviews. That has been one way forward. Specific law firms have started creches, and that, also has had mixed reviews, but nonetheless, it's a starting point. So I think for the legal profession, especially the appellate courts, this is a severe problem. And I think Suruchi asks a valid question. We're not able to come up with institutional responses, right? We're not able to come up with an institutional response as say the Supreme Court bar or bar associations, because we don't have right now those conversations happening, right?
Thank you, Menika. Pallavi, there's a question from Sandeep, and this is connected to a little related to the Mansfield rule, but the question is, how do you tackle the situation of, let's say, not so competent people elevated because of promoting diversity, and how that will potentially impact leadership? I mean, it's a bit, you did respond to it a bit, but I think it'll be useful to further articulate firm practice on this issue. That's a question from Sandeep.
Thanks for that, Raj. It's an interesting question because it has at its premise, a situation where you could have progression based without merit. Yes. And that progression, and I think, with all due respect, I reject that presumption, right? And I think what it comes down to is people will succeed or not succeed, whether they're diverse or not diverse. And I think it goes back to that perception that sometimes people are getting a boost, and that boost means that they're not talented to get there. And I think it goes back to, Tanveer made a really nice point on that. Is sometimes what you have is someone giving a helping hand to equalize the playing field. I think we've all made similar thoughts, people have talked about that in similar ways. I think Tejal talked about that as well. It's really trying to give people the advantage of being able to get through some of life's challenges, whether they come from societally, whether they come from the beginning parts of their life through the middle parts of their life, where there are points in inflections where people will leave the career. It's interesting, Menika talked about the loss of people in their 40s and they're in that middle gang, in that middle group. That's the same situation we face in the US. How do you retain people? How do you make sure that this career is fulfilling? It really comes back to, I think Sanjeev's question about, losing people through the system. It really comes back to creating those equal playing fields. I think, one of the things we have to acknowledge, and I think we all do, including myself, is we all have bias. And that bias shows itself in different ways. Every one of us, however well-intentioned we are, have bias. There's a test that you can go on Harvard University, and I encourage people to do it, which really tests people's implicit bias. One of the things the law firm right now is doing is we're doing implicit bias training. We're taking advantage of the COVID-19 situation to really push inclusion, really think about inclusion, right? We're all isolated in our homes. How do we bring people into the environment? So we are doing anti-bias inclusion trainings for everybody in our firm. All of us, we just went through that in Seattle last week. All of us are doing online training. Look at our own biases, think about them, think about how we can grow as organizations. But I think really what it comes down to is organizations fundamentally have to be committed to merit, and that merit will always show itself in different ways. What we're talking about here is not any kind of, and I think I talked about this in the beginning, is this whole concept of the qualified minority. We're not talking about compromising standards. We're talking about equalizing the pool from which we draw people. So I think, Sanjeev, the question really is about how we make sure that we give everyone equal chances of success. And I think one of the things we have to think about is when we do elevate a person who is diverse or is a woman into a position of power, how do we support that person? Do we make sure they have an equal voice? Do we make sure that they're given the same kind of power that others have in the situation? Do we make sure that they are given the same tools for success and the same voice that everybody else has? And I think that is the key to ensuring that those individuals keep growing and keep performing in their organizations.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. Tejal, there's a question from Abhilasha Ramakrishnan. And Abhilasha is asking about the fact that law firms and companies in some countries, including the UK, are guided by equality, diversity, and inclusion policies, the things he talked about in the hiring process and day-to-day functioning. How does this compare to the practice that prevails in India? Does, MNCs which are operating in India, do they follow the same practice? And do you see other, your own clients and others you deal with in India, some of them, do they mirror this policy?
Yeah, so there's no definitive percentage. So it's not like, there's a uniform percentage across the world that applies. So there's a lot based on sort of the local environment, the local talent pools, You know, a lot of developing countries, we can say, have a lot of diverse candidates, but not all are suited or at the, available. The talent pools are small and large in different organizations in different countries. So we have the same principles, but like I said, the principle is more about having a diverse slate than actually hiring an X number of people, because that's really defeating the meritocracy of the place. But you cannot say, hey, it's 26% for X country or 11% for another. But you do try to drive as much as you can.
Thank you so much, Tejal. Pratibha, there's a very difficult question from Shireen Moti. Shireen is asking, what are the legal and social measures that should be taken now for India to see its first woman Chief Justice?
Yeah, I expect that from Shireen. Okay, so I think I already outlined, my strong issues with how the Supreme Court is currently looking at elevations and not considering diversity in terms of taking that forward. I think that needs to be done immediately. There definitely, and there was recently an article about candidates who could become Chief Justice if they're elevated in time. There's absolutely no, and to Sandeep's question, often in the garb of saying that this should be a meritocracy and the elevation should be on basis of merit and not on the basis of diversity. Can somebody please tell me that they consider all 30 Supreme Court judges that are sitting in terms of merit superior to other female judges who have been superseded? And who's taking that decision, right? In the name of meritocracy, I think sometimes we try and keep the status quo. And that's what I think Tejan and Pallavi were trying to say in nice words, that you try and bring in equality, and equality means that if you've started from a different place in life, you try and bring those people to the same place, and that's affirmative action, right? So it's not promoting something that is not meritocratic, but ensuring that you give everybody that equal opportunity. And to me, add on to that in law firms and in judiciary and in the bar, that the unconscious bias is so strong. I think, to Shireen's question, recognizing that there is an unconscious bias and having a wider discussion on those two topics, unconscious bias and recognition by the Supreme Court that they need to represent society, which has 50% women. And the bar and the legal society speaking up now. I think we all have a duty to ensure that we are speaking up on this issue if we want to achieve, which is probably the only very obvious leadership position in the country that a woman has not had. It's shameful.
Thank you very much, Pratibha, for that. There are a number of questions which there's a question from Baboni, Thara Singh, Devishi, and Tanveer, I want to take that question to you. It's a bit what you talked about.
Yes.
The question is, since the law is written and spoken and taught largely in English, how can we ensure regional and linguistic diversity? And is it always going to be a tough challenge for people who come from backgrounds that may not necessarily be, let's say, from urban and upper middle class type? In that process, are we constantly going to see minorities and many others unrepresented in the legal profession? It's a tough question. I know that. Yeah.
No doubt that the law is taught in English language, but yes, in all other in all other states where people want to study law, now I believe that besides you can write a law exam in the local language as well, but ultimately it all depends upon how the justice delivery system works. For example, in the state of Rajasthan, right from the trial courts to the high court, you can file your pleadings in the local vernacular, that is Hindi. And even the judges write their judgments in the Hindi language. I guess, you see, the point is that any person, who has, wants to come into this profession has to realize that that legal profession predominantly, is one where you have to have, a willingness and a desire to strive on your own. So this is not government job or government providing you an avocation. So you have to put in that extra effort. So if, say, there is somebody, let's say from Muzaffarpur in Bihar, and he wants to study law and he wants to one day and join Amarchand Mangaldas or Pratibha's office. So he has to recognize that, like, he's to do good and, excel in whatever position he is. And then, there is a responsibility, I believe, certainly on the recruiters as well, to recruit widely, to give a chance, and to allow a person to prove his mettle. The mettle is not proved only because you passed out, say, from Nalsar, Hyderabad, or with due respect, say, National Law School, Bangalore. The mettle can be proved after, you perform in a law office after, say, about 2 years as well. And people have done it, but they have worked hard. Somebody, may not be so gifted right from the word go to, have a great power of speaking extempore. But, in their fields, they've subsequently done very well.
Thank you
so
much.
Has to be there.
Tanveer, since you mentioned the National Law School multiple times, and my friend Menaka is a graduate of NLS Bangalore, and we are graduates of Delhi University, and my students some of them who are watching, in some ways, many of these institutions are privileged institutions.
Correct.
Very much so.
Educational experience and learning that we might have got does put us in advantage over others. Menaka, there's a question from Avinash Matthew, and he's asking a question that you and I had talked about it before. The issue of caste. I mean, is caste a neglected factor in the legal space? And I think this panel, and he discloses that he's a student at Jindal. So yeah. I'm going to ask, he's asking, is caste a neglected factor in the legal space, given that you have not been able to find a Dalit panelist? I didn't see this question. It was a difficult one. I'm putting it there.
No. So firstly, I think, Avinash, it's an excellent question. Raj, you're obviously doing something right, because your students, and he's a student of yours, is asking a very important question. I'm very clear on this. Caste is deeply neglected, deeply, deeply neglected. I think it'd be very interesting if you did, and some of this has been done, reports that have come out that have been prepared from the National Law School. Recently, we've had 2 Dalit graduates writing about their experience of being from, a certain caste background and what that's meant. We've had students who came in on reserved quotas writing about those experiences. And I think if you did a caste breakdown of any aspect of the legal profession, whether it is senior counsels, judges, I think we would find the results to be, well, unsurprising but sad. It is completely neglected. And I think, Avinash, by asking that question, you've highlighted even, a gap on this panel. We have not had someone speak to that experience. And I think it is a failing of the legal community. We desperately need to have more judges, more lawyers, more interns who are, reflective of this country. A majority of this country comes from a low caste background. It is absent in the legal profession, so clearly, much to do on that count. And it is a particularly glaring failing because India's constitutions, one of its fundamental, promises is to make amends for caste discrimination, historical caste discrimination.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. There's a question from Suruchi Kumar, who is an advocate, and This is a question about how do we change the mindset of the legal fraternity to be more accepting of genders other than male? This is a male-dominated profession, and history demonstrates that legal profession as well as judiciary do not have women on top. I would like you to probably reflect upon the time when your entry into the legal profession in the US and how you have seen it changing in the US and what experiences it can provide, learnings it can provide for India.
Thanks for that. That's an excellent question, Suruchi. Thank you for that. It's interesting because I think we all are in different places in different times, but we've all experienced that in very real times. I remember when I started in my career, which was about 20 years ago, I had a mediation, and mediation in the US is very similar to the concept in India, where you just basically informally try and settle a case, through a methodology where you have a mediator, you have opposing counsel, and yourself. And similar to, I think, Tejal talked about an experience she had, the mediator would not talk to me. He would not talk to me. He kept talking to my my colleague, who was not in charge of the case, but I was the lead point, and he kept referring to my colleague, and that went on for 4 or 5 hours. And eventually, I turned to the client and I said, "Is it okay if we send my colleague home? He's not got any role to play." And he said, "That's fine. Let's go ahead and do that." And we sent the colleague home. So the mediator came back and said, "Where is lead counsel? How am I going to settle the case? Lead counsel is missing." I said, "No, I'm here. We're going to settle this case." And he got a little befuddled because he couldn't understand. There were 7 people there. There was 1 woman and 6 men. We settled the case, but it came because first, I think we have to own the experience, and you have to be able to speak up in the experience. I think accepting something is happening is part of the issue, right? And it is difficult. It's isolating. It's scary to be able to stand in that kind of situation and say, "I'm going to take a stand. I'm going to actually tell someone to go home." And you have to be surrounded by colleagues who are supportive of that. In that instance, the client was as well. And, that client is still a client of mine 20 years from now, 20 years later. But it took a long time for us to be able to accept that. I think the other point is you have to have role models. You have to be able to look up in your system or around you and see people who have succeeded, who are women, who are people of color, or, whatever diverse backgrounds that you're looking to emulate. Because it's very difficult to be alone. Isolation is a very difficult thing. And I think in a profession, any profession across the world, there is a male dominance, right? The reality is there are more men than women in this field who stay in this field and succeed in the field. And I think we talked about a lot of points of attrition, and those attrition points is what we're trying to plug, because on the recruiting levels, we're doing much better, but it's on the advancement levels that we're not doing as well. I think the issue also, going to Suruchi's point about how do we make sure that we are able to be a voice in that situation? I think one of the things we have to accept is we have to challenge the system. We have to speak in the system. I think just sitting there and, the other part of it, we have to say yes to opportunities. So one of the things that I think as women, as diverse individuals, a lot of opportunities come at us that we are afraid of. You feel fearful of saying yes. Someone comes to you and says, "You can argue this case," and you say to yourself, "Can I really? Am I really going to succeed at that?" There's a lot of fear that is there as part of the psyche of individuals who are from diverse backgrounds. You have to battle that fear, and you have to be able to say, "You know what? Not instead of why me, you have to go into the mindset of why not me." And that, I think, is the fundamental difference between the way male and women look at those opportunities. And I think that's part of, going back to the sense of balance, right? And choices. We get told all the time as men and women make choices, men basically are able to move forward. I don't think that's true. I think we all have priorities. And I think as women, as in men, we have to be able to prioritize our career in a way that makes sense for us. Whether it's like having your home and your office in the same building, like, I know Pratibha does, or whether it's being able to find balance in the situation. I don't think we apologize for that. I think we have to accept there is a dominance in the system that we are catching up on. But at the same time, we have to be able, our voices have to be part of the solution.
Thank you very much, Pallavi. There's a fascinating question for Tejal. It's from Feba Nisha. Feba is asking, having reached almost to the top of the ladder already in this tough world, what would be your advice to young women lawyers who want to climb up the ladder and create impact globally?
So one is what I had said earlier. When Pallavi talked about priorities, I think you will always be faced with crossroads. So the idea really is picking your focus and your priorities. The second piece to what Pratibha said about there's no work life. It's all life. Okay, that would be kind of the second piece. And the third really is what we've seen in a survey where people say that they don't leave the profession at various points because of work-life balance or aspiration gaps. They leave because what we call a cost-benefit issue.
Yeah.
Feel it's not worth it. And I think it's important to remember that it is worth it, to get over those middle humps that I call and say, you know, you need to reach where you need to reach, and don't define success as X or Y, because each one's definition of where they need to reach to be successful is different.
Thank you so much, Sejal. Pratibha, there are a number of questions focusing on something I believe it must be pretty dear to you, about this sort of, accumulated guilt of women professionals in trying to balance work and family. I mean, how do you respond to that? Which is that they're constantly trying to balance, and in that process, women tend to feel that they are not giving enough to their family. But if they have to do that, they may have to compromise on their advancement in legal profession. The accumulated guilt question.
So I wouldn't like to generalize in terms of all women, but definitely the story of my life and a lot of my friends, where you learn to live with the guilt. I don't think there's been a day since I've had kids where I've not felt guilty for being a working woman. But at the same time, you realize over time that you are being a role model for your kids, and that really helps. I think as long as you're providing safe environment for your kids, and we are Pallavi alluded to this, I think we are very blessed in India that we have a family support system in which kids can grow. But as long as, so I've always had this mantra of, as long as your kids are safe and loved, and as long as I have that in the back of my mind that I want to leave this world a little more equal for my daughter than when I started. That's how you deal with the guilt.
Thank you very much, Pratibha. Tanvi, there is a question about a very, I think, a bit complex as well, in the sense that the religious diversity with regard to the bar and bench, it remains also some sort of whispers in the corridor. When it is attempted and achieved, there are issues. People talk about the inadequacy of merit. And if it is not, then people might lament about the fact that it is not achieved. So how does one, create an environment and condition where every attempt to achieve, let's say, a religious form of diversity need not go through some sort of a defense and justification?
Dr. Saab, I've read somewhere that, cynics, the voice of cynics may be very loud, but there are very limited things that they achieve. So cynicism will always be there. So I would look at it from 2 points of view, and I'll give a mixed answer, what I heard from my other wonderful panelists also. One is, you see, the aspiration to have more women senior advocates or more judges amongst women, or say perhaps, a woman chief justice of India. I would be more concerned about India as a state. I would like to have a system where, there are more women equally drawn into a strong trial court practice in various fields, a high court practice, and a corporate law firm practice as well. I don't want to have a situation where next time I go to Faridabad District Court and I see about, say, 3 women, and Ghaziabad, I've already stated. So when you will, amend that diversity issue, ostensibly you will see people, coming up, and challenges, are to be met. So, for example, the question is that if there is a problem with, some people, doing whisper speaking, let the people, do the whispers. Ultimately, elevation or to the high court or becoming a judge, is something where certain people will have a say. For example, if you see the present system of how I feel that in last about more than 6 to 7 years, certain merit judges, have not been elevated at all. And I'll call a spade a spade. I think, Justice Pradeep Nandrajog of the Delhi High Court was one of the most meritorious judges deserving to go to the Supreme Court. But it all became a joke at the end of the day. So we also know about, what happened to the Chief Justice of, Uttarakhand, and how, that game all was played. So difficulties will be there, but I'm a believer in broadening the base. If you broaden the base, you will have people, growing up the ladder, and, let the cynics and the people who want to indulge in whisper mongering, indulge in that mongering all their life and waste their time. It just doesn't affect me.
Thank you so much, Tanveer. Menaka, there is a question about to what extent the legal profession, believes in diversity training, for example. I mean, we know that, law firms and companies and organizations take effort in doing that. But we know that the legal profession, in particular the litigating lawyers, are not so organized as the profession. Yeah. So how can we even begin this conversation there?
No, I think that's a great question. I don't think I have no memory of the Supreme Court ever having had, either for the bar or, a diversity training, for any of us. We are all untrained on it, including me. So I think it's such an excellent question. So much practitioners of law, right? Lawyers at the bar are a guild. We are a guild. We've traditionally always been a guild. And so much of this has to be about how do we regulate ourselves? I mean, what are the lectures that we choose to have? What are the issues that those lectures we choose to highlight? One of the most tried and tested topics when it comes to anything progressive is public interest litigation in India. I mean, come on, like how many of those have we had? I think we do need to have these conversations, whether as a training or whether as a lecture. And I think the bar needs to be supportive of it. I think the Supreme Court Bar Association needs to be supportive. I think our High Court Bar Associations, the Trial Court Bar, we need to believe that as a guild that virtually regulates itself, we regulate ourselves, we need to trigger these conversations, and senior colleagues across the board, across the spectrum, across the court system, need to push for these conversations. That is not happening right now.
So there's a question. Thank you so much, Menaka. There's a question from Akriti, Vishakha, Aniket, Prashant, Meghna, a number of them. This question I would like to ask all three of you, Pallavi, Pratibha, and Tejal. In terms of your own personal transitions from a lawyer to a leadership position, have you yourself, changed your own opinions and perspectives about diversity? And how have you responded to that leadership? In the sense that at one level, and I think people are asking a variance of what I'm paraphrasing, which is that when you have in the early stage of your career, you have certain expectations from the profession. And then when you achieve positions of power and responsibility at the leadership level, do you see those, aspects being redefined in your own, experience? All three can reflect on that. Pallavi.
So thanks for that. That's an excellent question, everyone. And thanks for asking that. And I think, one of my challenges, and I think a little bit different perspective for me is the fact that I'm also an immigrant. So when I came into this country, one of the challenges I faced as an immigrant was trying to understand how I fit in as a diverse individual with a very different mind, with a very different data set. So, it's interesting for me right now to hear all these questions about caste and religion. There are not so many questions on those issues on this side of the water, right? So I think one of the things I try to do in the beginning is become like everybody else. So the way I dealt with diversity is to blend in. So I used to get very offended when people used to ask me, what's the best Indian restaurant? I used to say, why are you asking me, And then I realized the reason they asked me is because I am Indian and I probably do know the answer, right? And I think as I grew more senior, I got more comfortable being myself. I got much more comfortable talking about my background, talking about the diversity I bring to the table. accepting who I am in my own mantle of leadership. And I think when I was younger, I felt it was more important for me to pretend like I liked sports. I don't know any sports. I don't even, I have no idea of sports. And I have no idea, my little 6-year-old knows a lot more sports than I do, right? He was asking me about, I don't know, something about Packers and Cardinals. I have no idea what they are, right? But I think at the end of the day, what I was trying to do was become somebody else to fit into the system. And as my confidence grew in the system and my trust grew in the system, right? So I come from a law firm that really extols these virtues of diversity. In fact, many of the management committee members of my firm are actually watching this stream right now. They want to hear, they want to learn different kinds of diversity. I think it's a testament to the leadership of the firm that we are not only, we are not there to be leaders, we're there to be learners. And I think as I grew in my confidence and I started realizing I don't belong because I look like everyone else. I belong because I'm me. And my space is created for myself as part of the leadership team. That confidence has led to my voice becoming louder on diversity. It's led to the fact of understanding that I'm not challenging just myself, I'm challenging everybody around me. I think Manika talked about really institutionalizing training. Those kind of messages have to come from leadership. And if they're only coming from your diverse leaders, they don't have the same impact. Yeah. They have to come from everybody. That's why I think clients being on the panel are very important. I think all the different voices, not just people who look like you and me. It has to be every voice and every allied professional. Those allies have a very meaningful impact as you grow in leadership.
Thank you very much, Pallavi. Tejal.
So let me just talk about what I thought leadership is. When you start off with just competency. As you become a leader, as you grow, you need different skills. So, in the past, we used to look at IQ being kind of the only thing that got you somewhere. Then the whole conversation shifted to EQ. Now, if you actually look at it, it's AQ, right? It's adaptability quotient, because the world around us, look at COVID, is changing so fast. So I think one of the things as you grow into a leadership position is, how do I need to change myself to adapt to my new position, what the world, what the environment brings? And the second thing really, which I think we don't have enough of, is giving back. In terms of pulling other people up, in terms of, we all needed help. And when I look back, I got a lot of help in little ways all throughout. I would not have made it where I am without that. So talking about Pratibha's point of mentorship, coaching, bringing other people up with us is what really transitions you from just being an achiever to being a leader or being someone who can actually make a change.
Thank you so much, Tejal. Pratibha.
I think it's an excellent question. As a lawyer, you're just, and as a lawyer who's very aware of, being a female in the profession, you're more reactive to at least issues around gender and equality. As a leader, when you actually have to participate in decision making, you realize the complexities that are there for providing that equal opportunity in your organization. And I think that's, for me, that has been a great learning. And, I wish we would talk about it in more detail, because, the unconscious bias I never understood before I got into a leadership position. And not just others, my own. I say this a lot these days, that it's not just men, it's women. It's just, when you have a status quo way of thinking, unless you change it in a very recognized manner, it's going to be in the back of all of our minds. Also understanding my male colleagues better. It's not, every time, and again, I shouldn't just say male, just understanding people better in terms of this issue and how decisions are made in an organization. I think all those issues, and when you get more diverse leadership, I think that's when it helps an organization grow to be more inclusive. And that's why you need to provide a seat on the table to a more diverse group. because the way we assimilate that information and react to it is also very different. I see that in my organization. People coming from varied backgrounds will react to what the policy ought to be differently, and that's how you come to a better answer than if you just have a bunch of people which are very similar making that decision.
Thank you so much, Pratibha. Tanvi, there's a question specifically, possibly for you.
Okay.
This question is about the fact that how do we, promote diversity in the legal profession by, let's say, instilling a greater degree of social consciousness? I mean, that's obviously a tougher question in terms of what we can do at the level of the legal profession. But as a practicing lawyer, particularly in, let's say, more harsher settings in which you practice, how do you actually work towards promoting diversity?
Well, as I think, all the panelists echoed the same sentiment that irrespective of, what happens to you when you join, and you weighed your success or your years into a legal profession, whether you are into a pure litigation at the first court level or at the appellate court level, there is also an incumbent responsibility onto you to realize, that with the greater amount of diversity, we are all suited to benefit. So first of all, it's a war of biases which we have to recognize. If we don't recognize the inherent biases, we will never be able to, arrive at solutions. That's why, first of all, we have to see that whether, there are biases, whether we recognize and how to shun them. For example, if there is going to be a bias in a society, that there will be only one kind of people living here with one kind of spiritual belief, and a person with another kind of spiritual belief will not be even allowed a tenancy. And that kind of a person is running an organization also. How do you expect that person to even, allow diversity in the first place? So first is, your own human sentiment, because you're human beings first. All human beings are born equal. Rest is creation of societies. And this is a never-ending war, Dr. Rajkumar. It's a never-ending war. We have to, live through it. And biggest responsibility is that when you arrive at a particular status, say, for example, my co-panelist now, Manika, is a highly reckoned senior Supreme Court lawyer, Pratibha. The moment you are in a position to help others, whether you are helping, first of all, secondly, whether you are helping again with a bias, or whether you are helping across by removing all the barriers yourself, when you achieve that, I think, the success is not very far away. That's why.
Thank you.
I wouldn't like to have a situation where there is a woman chief justice in India, but in Faridabad court, there are still only 2 lawyers among the women's community. What did we achieve? But I would be very happy if the women lawyers in diversity, diverse lawyers from various castes, undercastes, minorities, different religions are widely represented. And then we may have a woman chief justice, we may not have a woman chief justice. If we broaden the horizon, I think we are very near success. So
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tanveer. Thank you to all the panelists. We are almost coming to the end. I have another 100 questions unanswered, so I'm going to leave it at that. But I'm going to ask one final question to all of you, and we will go around all the panelists. For all those students of law who are watching this program, what would you like to tell them about their future careers in law and justice? What is your message to them? How should they mold themselves to be confident young lawyers who can break stereotypes, promote diversity, accept diversity, celebrate diversity, and fulfill their aspirations and make a greater impact in the world of law and justice? What's your, let's say, message for them? Menaka.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful question. I know, Raj, you've told me that there are thousands of people watching this. So I'm assuming that of many thousands, there are women and men and lower castes and upper castes and across religions, across orientations, across class, different law schools. I want to just say two things that I really hold dear. One, the practice of law is tremendously interesting. It is exciting, it is fun, it is wonderful. These are the stories of your country that you will navigate on a daily basis in your workspace, which is a court. But two, I think for any of you or each of you who feels that you are not the norm, you are different, or you come from a background which does not make for traditional law practitioners, I want to just say that, this profession is open to you. We are here for you. We are here to help. And most importantly, from my own life experience, if my story is possible, then your story is possible.
Thank you, Menika. Pallavi.
I think going back to where we started in some ways, the biggest thing I would say is believe in yourself. Know that every one of us who are up here on this panel representing success, so to speak, lives with the same fears that you live with. You've just managed to mask it more effectively than you have. Believe in the fact that you can grow, believe in the fact that you have the same abilities as everyone else does, and believe in your own ability to ask for help. I think one of the biggest things that has helped me throughout my career has been that ability to receive help and ask for help. There's no weakness in doing that. I think allies, mentors, sponsors are very important parts of our careers. I think, and believe in your own ability to succeed. There is no reason that any one of you who is watching should not be the people who are in these positions 5, 10, 15 years down the road. The only difference is that belief that comes from yourself. And I think being diverse candidates, being people from different backgrounds, there are places and times that you doubt yourself. There are places and times where you doubt your own ability and your place in that room. You belong. And the reason you belong is because you have to be able to be in that place to say to yourself, I'm here, I belong, and I am going to succeed.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. Tejal.
So just a couple of things. One is to be a successful lawyer, it's not enough to know only the law. I think there are many more attributes that are required to succeed. And therefore, don't say just because I got A's in law school, I'm going to make it in life. I think there's a lot more to learn. And the second thing I would say, your career is a marathon, okay? And there will be many issues that come along the way.
Very true.
Always got to make your career the non-negotiable. The minute that is non-negotiable, everything else will work itself out.
Thank you so much, Tejal. Pratibha.
I think it's very important for the next generation specifically to know that it's okay to be different. There is not one mantra for success, and there is no cookie cutter careers anymore. I don't agree with the statement for women that you can't have it all. I've always believed you need to define what your all is and then go for it. So, if you want to slow down because you want to have kids, absolutely do that. That doesn't mean that you're less successful than the others. That's just your career path. If you don't want to have kids, that's totally your decision. And that's as fulfilling a life, I think, as any other. So I think, recognizing that there are different paths to success, and you can decide your own destiny. And I think it's a great profession to do that. In India, you've got enough role models, I think, in every field to be successful. And I think law as a career for women is a great place to be.
Thank you so much, Pratibha. Tanveer.
Yes. So I would say that, for my young law students, entrants, people who are in first year law, second year law, first of all, kill your inner fear, master the fear inside you. There's always a lurking fear inside a person. Will I succeed? Will I not succeed? Am I cut out? I'm not cut out. Look, there are so many people with so many connections. Some people are from legal families. Some people are from privileged families. How will I make it out here? So, the negativity has to go. The moment you master your fear, that's the first step towards success. I am a first generation lawyer in Delhi. I come from Kashmir. And probably, you know, I've been in, you know, a couple of probably India's some of the most sensational cases. And how did I get to do those cases? Purely on the consideration of merit and nothing else. That if we go with Mr. Bede, we have a good chance to succeed. And inherently, you know, a lawyer, whether he's in litigation or in a corporate structure, he cannot run away from a challenge. So to litigating lawyers, you know, people who want to go into, say a criminal defense practice, for example, so I would say to you that you must be the first person to take the worst case, because that is what will bring out the best in you. So believe in yourself, believe in your capability, build on your capability. And I think that surely success will be on your way, come what may.
Thank you very much. Let me take this moment to thank my distinguished panelists for sparing so much time to be part of this discussion, so patiently taking my questions, but also questions from our audience. We're very, very grateful to each one of you. Pallavi, Wahi, for sparing your time early in the morning. Menaka and Tejal and Tanveer and Pratibha for your thoughts and reflections. I'm sure the viewers were deeply inspired by your comments. I also want to thank our partner in this endeavor, Live Law, but also want to thank all the participants who have been part of this initiative. I want to conclude by saying that the discussion surrounding diversity will be a continuing work in project. But the fact that diversity is become a centerpiece of our discussion also demonstrate that it is not just a public policy imperative, it is also our destiny. It's also part of our effort to create a diverse society, means diversity and pluralism is also about purpose and principle. And with those words, I would like to once again thank all of you. This event and initiative is promoted by Jindal Global Law School of OP Jindal Global University as a public interest initiative. Every week, I host 2 such webinars, and I invite you to join me on Wednesday, 27th, in partnership with the Law School Admission Council in the US. We are doing a global legal education colloquium on the theme, Why Study Law? How to Select Students into the Best Law Schools. I'll be joined by Professor Christine Thies Alvarez, Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, Professor Maiden Carpenter, Dean and Professor of Law, University of New Hampshire, Franklin Pierce School of Law, Professor Jason Dickinson, Director of the India Testing Law School Admission Council, USA, Professor Kelly Testy, President and Chief Executive Officer, Law School Admission Council, USA, Professor Kevin Washburn, Dean and Professor of Law from the US and Chair of the LSAC Board of Trustees. They will join me at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, 27th. Thank you very much, and thank you for your presence.
Before you conclude, I have one request, and if I can make it, because you had more than 150 questions. So if any of the viewers had a question on to me, which could not be put forward for paucity of time, I would request, you know, to upload my email. I would love to respond to each of the questions, you know, which was directed towards me, because I believe that whatever we have learned at the end of the day, we must share. And by sharing also, we will be able to impart something to the oncoming lawyers.
Thank you very much, Tanveer. And of course, as I mentioned to you before, this entire program is on YouTube live, and obviously it's recorded and it's available for people to view. And I'll also be sending the link to all of you. Thank you so much for your presence.
Very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.